Okay, let's dive into this. When most of us think about William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, we immediately picture the grand speeches, the bloody assassination, and, that ultimate betrayal right there in the Senate. But today, we're going to look at this iconic play through a completely different lens. Welcome to this explainer, where we are going to deconstruct the literal mechanics of Shakespeare's classic text. We aren't just going to look at the plot. We're going to open the hood and examine the actual gears that make this engine run. We'll explore exactly how Shakespeare manipulated time, bent ancient dramatic rules, and masterfully wove character psychology together with historical inevitability. Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to start with the core conflicts, then break down the anatomy of a tragedy. Next up, we'll explore the supernatural and fate, followed by adapting the three unities, and finally, we'll dissect the dramatic timeline. So, let's get right into it.
Section 1. The core conflicts. To really understand the architecture of this play, we first have to understand the foundational bedrock it's built upon. And this brilliantly illustrates the macro-level tension of the entire story, the massive, undeniable clash between monarchy and republicanism. The play opens with a violently divided society, right? You have the supporters of Caesar representing a shift toward monarchy, totally clashing against the supporters of republican principles. Now, the conspirators murder Caesar specifically to kill the idea of monarchy and save the republic. But the deep irony here, and Shakespeare's brilliant stroke of consequence, is that this very murder plunges Rome into absolute chaos and civil war. According to the text, peace is only finally reestablished in Rome under the rule of three Caesars, Mark Antony, Octavius, and Lepidus, so the attempt to destroy monarchy essentially guarantees its return.
But to actually commit that monumental murder, the characters have to make some terrible moral choices. And that leads us to what the text calls the tragedy of deception. Brutus actually admits that Caesar, personally, is harmless at the moment. He kills him on the mere presumption that he might become a ruthless dictator. To justify this incredibly flawed moral choice, Brutus fundamentally deceives himself. In this twisted logic, he eagerly accepts that by killing Caesar, they're actually doing him a favor by cutting short his years of fearing death. He literally has to convince himself that the murder is a noble, sacrificial right. He isn't just deceived by Cassius, Brutus deceives himself to find psychological relief from the absolute horror of what he's about to do.
Section 2. Anatomy of a tragedy. Moving from those grand political themes, we shift our focus down to the specific character frameworks that officially define this as a Shakespearean tragedy. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how perfectly the fatal flaws of our two central figures contrast. A core rule of Shakespearean tragedy is that the heroes, and the text explicitly notes that both Caesar and Brutus are great human beings, are brought down by a specific inherent fault in their own character. Take Caesar. His tragic flaw is his unchecked ambition, his immense pride, and his pure arrogance. He believes himself untouchable. Then we have Brutus. His flaw isn't pride, it's a rigid, one-sided ideology. He is so utterly blinded by his abstract republican ideals that he completely loses touch with human reality and the true political landscape. These precise, opposing traits absolutely guarantee their mutual doom. But why do we subject ourselves to these heavy stories? Well, the source text points out something fascinating about the purpose of this tragedy: catharsis. There is a profound psychological relief for the audience. By watching these massive historical figures suffer total ruin, by seeing the terrible waste, destruction, and the suffering of innocent people as cosmic order breaks down, we, the readers, gain a better understanding of life. We compare our own everyday sorrows with the spectacular downfall of these heroes, realize the comparative insignificance of our own troubles, and, almost magically, we are able to bear our own burdens just a little bit better.
Section 3. The supernatural and fate. So we have our psychological mechanics in place. Now let's move to the external mechanics, the eerie, uncontrollable forces that thrilled Elizabethan audiences.
Superstitions are not just background decoration in Julius Caesar. They're absolutely crucial structural elements driving the entire plot forward. Our source highlights the famous warning to beware the Ides of March, the terrifying storm that creates unbelievable superstitious terror, Calpurnia's horrible prophetic dreams, the reappearance of a ghost, and the birds of evil omen. All of this creates immense traumatic suspense. But more importantly, they show the undeniable working of fate. The text tells us that Caesar has been firmly marked out by fate as a victim. Despite all these blatant warnings, he is completely unable to defend himself against fate's final decisions. And this brings up a truly fascinating debate from the text. When Caesar's ghost appears to Brutus at Sardis, is it a literal, supernatural entity, or is it merely the product of Brutus's guilty, fracturing imagination? It's a great question to ponder, but as our source points out, the literal reality of the ghost actually doesn't alter its dramatic importance. Regardless of whether it's magic or madness, the vision serves as a highly effective mechanical tool by Shakespeare to stress that Caesar's powerful personality and his influence continue to dominate the world long after his physical death.
Section 4. Adapting the three unities. Let's transition into the purely technical genius of the playwright. How exactly did Shakespeare handle the ancient, rigid rules of dramatic writing?
So, the crucial point is understanding the insane constraints Shakespeare was working against. Aristotle drew up three strict principles for drama. First, the unity of time stated that the action of a play must not exceed a single day. Second, the unity of place dictated that the setting must not change. Characters couldn't just magically teleport to different cities. And finally, the unity of action required a single, focused plot with absolutely no secondary or minor subplots. Now think about it. These are incredibly difficult constraints when you're trying to tell a sprawling historical epic involving wars and entire empires.
So how does Shakespeare navigate this? Brilliantly. He strictly adheres to the unity of action. As the text notes, there is no subplot and no digression whatsoever in Julius Caesar. The movement is remarkably swift and straightforward. You get the conspiracy, the murder at the center, and the direct civil war consequences. But he creatively bends the unity of place. While the action does move from the streets of Rome over to Sardis and then to the battlefield of Philippi, the text argues he faithfully observes the spirit of the rule, because all these locations remain relatively close to Rome in the minds of the audience.
Section 5. The Dramatic Timeline. This brings us to the final, and perhaps most impressive, mechanical feat detailed in our source.
Let's move to Actus and see how this builds our understanding of his genius. Remember Aristotle's unity of time, which demanded a single day? Shakespeare creates what the text calls a double time scheme. On one hand, you have the actual historical time. The true events of this play span 3 whole years, extending from 45 BC to 42 BC. But on the other hand, you have the dramatic time. Shakespeare compresses those 3 years so effectively that the dramatic action of the play feels as though it unfolds over roughly just 3 days of intense, continuous momentum. To truly appreciate this massive compression, let's track the actual days. The entire epic spans just 6 literal days of action presented to the audience. Day 1 is in February of 44 BC. Then an invisible interval of a month passes before Day 2. Day 3 is the famous Ides of March. Then Shakespeare casually and honestly audaciously inserts a massive historical interval of 8 entire months before Day 4 begins in November of 43 BC. Another year passes before days 5 and 6 close out the play in October of 42 BC. By presenting just 6 specific days, separated by vast, unshown intervals, Shakespeare beautifully condenses years of history into a tight, relentless theatrical experience.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to take away from this explainer. We've seen how meticulously Shakespeare engineered the mechanics of this play, from manipulating time and dramatic unities to deploying the inescapable forces of fate. Yet we've also seen how the deeply personal flaws of Caesar's pride and Brutus's rigid ideology make their doom entirely inevitable. So what do you think? Does the strict, almost mathematical structure of a tragedy control the fate of its characters? Or is it the organic, psychological flaws of those humans that end up building the tragic structure around them? It is the ultimate question of free will versus fate, masterfully hidden within the gears of a stage play. Thank you so much for joining me to decode the anatomy of this masterpiece. Keep analyzing, keep questioning, and I hope this leaves you eager to dive back into the classics with a brand new perspective.